Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Jerry O'Sullivan, and welcome to this year's CTO Roadmap session. In this session, we don't talk to the commentators or the analysts, but the actual people who have to make the tough decisions. CTOs, leading CTOs from our industry, who have to put their reputation on the line in trying to work out what new technologies are relevant to growing their business. Now, this is the 4th year, for those of you who know, that we've done this. So it's been very interesting to see the journey from when we started this in 2014. If I think back to 2014, it seemed we had quite a narrow focus on things like broadcast standards, whether it was going to be 4K, 8K. But what seemed to happen through the years is we've taken more of a step back at the entire ecosystem and the entire user experience, and especially how IP and cloud technologies are now changing our industry. As a former CTO, where it came into focus for me about what's been going on over the last 12, 18 months was last Tuesday. I was sat there with my 10-year-old son looking at the Apple X launch. Now, I was born in black and white TV days, and my son, who I'll always tease, was born 3 months before the iPhone was launched. So he's a pre-iPhoner in his technology life. So it's all relative when you become old. So we're there watching the fantastic guys at Apple, those geniuses out there on the stage, and we're watching Johnny Ive's video. And up until then, we'd kind of got a little bit samey. My son's a bit of a techie. But then they explained to us that when I'm going to pick up my new iPhone in a couple of weeks, it's going to project 30,000 invisible dots on my face. And using artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, it will switch on. All of that just to switch on my phone. And we kind of looked at each other. It was a little bit of a surreal moment. And I thought, is that overkill, or is that really clever? I mean, my son just looked at me and said, hey, really cool, as we watched the Johnny Ive video. But I thought, have we made the on-off switch now redundant? And it was interesting to hear things like machine learning being talked about just to switch on my phone. And I wonder if we'll hear about things like machine learning and artificial intelligence in the next hour from our panel, who I'd need to introduce straight away. So we have, this year, John Honeycutt, who's CTO of Discovery, Latha Maripuri, who's the Global CISO and Deputy CTO of News Corp, Ramki Sankaranarayanan, who's the CEO and Prime Focus Technologies, and Balan, the CTO of Liberty Global. Please give them a round of applause. I think what will help us as well is, if you don't mind, if you're in what I would call a pure engineering or technical role, could you put your hands up, please? Just want to see what the mix of the audience is. So it's about an even split, which is great. So John has been with us every year, 4 years, doing this. So John, 4 years ago, I asked you a question, and I always ask you the same question just to start us off. So can you tell us what's been going on at Discovery Channel over the last 12, 18 months? What new technologies are you seeing emerging through? And what does your roadmap look like now?
Sure. Well, it's a big question, so I'll try to sort of sum it up maybe into a couple of key points. I think that, and I found it interesting, your question about a purely engineering role. Frankly, I don't think anybody's in a purely engineering role anymore. I think it's really all about the integration and really re-engineering, frankly, of supply chains and how we take content, create content, buy content, whatever that entry point is, and efficiently drive that across the supply chain to reach consumers on really any platform they choose. We're no longer a TV company. We're no longer purely a gaming company, not us, but the companies that are in those characteristics. It's so much about reaching across so many different platforms. At Discovery, we've moved, if you look at our history, from, we're a little 30 years old or so, purely factual lifestyle business historically. We're 146 days away from broadcasting the Olympic Games on Eurosport. So, you know, it's a totally different business with totally different types of outlets. And that means for my organization, you know, really reimagining what that supply chain could look like, obviously increasingly virtualizing it, cloudifying it, as we call it internally, and transforming that environment to be prepared for this, I guess you can call it multi-platform exploitation. There's a buzzword.
Wow.
And that's really what that is where do these assets go and how do I get them there as efficiently as possible. And every component of our roadmap is focused, you know, on components of that strategy.
But you've got over, I think I read, 600 content suppliers. Mm-hmm. So how are you scaling your workflows without a kind of an unpredictable amount of investment that's required? How can you manage that?
Well, the goal is to make them predictable. So by reaching further up into our supply chain and getting to, you know, intent of the asset, when a programmer decides to put it on a schedule, they're not only thinking about linear television, but OTT, VOD, maybe a streaming service. The more that we can understand about that intent for the piece of content, the more we can design workflows and, frankly, automation downstream to create those assets. We want to be in a much more predictable manufacturing environment mm-hmm. than a reactive manufacturing environment, which if you look at, I think, at least speaking for my business, that's sort of the way we were. Asset shows up, and then suddenly a bunch of work kicks off. Now, if we know that there's, you know, X amount of assets due on a Thursday, I can start to scale things like transcoding engines in QA. I can be prepared for that because it's no longer physical, it's virtual. I can reserve those, I can put a hedge against them. Look, maybe someday we could bid it out. Maybe there'll be a marketplace for this stuff. And we'll suddenly say, I've got X amount of hours of transcoding, what will you charge me?
So, I mean, predictably, we've kind of launched straight into this whole thing about virtualization of services and how the cloud can aid us. You've always been an advocate of pretty much, you've got to be all in on this or not. Do you still hold true to that?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to put a toe in the water here and there with cloud. I think just the economic model of, you know, up, down, I mean, that's where they're making money. So the more you put it up and take it down, the more egress, you know, you're being charged. I think you have to look at this as a holistic strategy, and it's driven by, and where we started, back to your 600 production suppliers, is with control of the content, right? So one of the first projects we launched is a project we call OnRamp internally. And there's actually a white paper about it. Josh Derby, who runs a lot of our R&D efforts, wrote a fantastic white paper explaining it, and I think it's on the IBC website, what this OnRamp project is. And it's basically an integration between our business affairs, production management, production suppliers, and delivery. So we've taken all of that requirements information from our business systems, and we've exposed that out as an expected delivery, so to speak. And we've simplified it to make it easier for the production companies to upload these assets. Now, that may seem all well and interesting and, you know, maybe not so sexy to people, but it's hard. When you start reaching up into business systems and there's rules and different rules and, you know, interpretations of contracts that are maybe intentionally vague, you know, that's really hard to do. So the harder, you know, the further you reach upstream into the business systems, the more complicated this gets. Packaging, rights management, all kinds of stuff. But that's where the efficiency is, or the speed to market as well.
Balan, does this ring true at Liberty Global? Are you got synergies there?
Yeah, I think we all face the same challenges. I mean, the life of a CTO now is extremely different. There's huge disruptions happening in technology. That's a given that we're all living through. But there's also huge disruptions happening in consumer behavior and their expectations, and huge disruptions happening in the business models. So you're trying to deal with all the changes that you've got to keep up with from a technology standpoint. And then you look at your customers, or even your non-customers. I mean, their expectations are so different. Their perception of value is so different. And if you look at the demographics of today's younger kids, that demographic shift is probably the widest ever between generations. I mean, previous generations, one to another, you'll have differences like, you know, your style of clothing, music, maybe the way you communicate. But the current new generation, they look at everything differently, and their ability to adapt to technologies is just unbelievably fast. That keeps, traditional business models at edge. And then you have this disruption of commercially. You have, irrational competitors. You have folks that are rational, but yet they have a different cost structure than you do. And you have to, and a lot of our cost structure really resides in the network. And so the way you run your networks has to be different. I tell my folks, Netflix is $8.99. The cost for a lot of pay TV operators to just get video to a customer home is more than $8.99. So how do you compete with somebody whose price is a lot less than your cost, right? And that's really, I think, many of us would say, the challenges our boards and our management team would give us.
Latha, what are you seeing at News Corp as far as this philosophy almost of going to the cloud? Is it more a migration of services for you? Because to be honest, I've heard a lot on this panel over the years of people claiming to be fully committed to the cloud, but we know very well there are parts of the operations that people don't feel maybe are relevant to go that way. What have your findings been at News Corp?
Yeah, so just to level set, because News Corp, like many companies, has been undergoing our own sort of business transformation and diversification over the past few years. So today it consists of news publishing with brands such as the Wall Street Journal, Barron's Market Watch. We also have book publishing. We have radio broadcasting, sports broadcasting, digital advertising, and also not as well known, but a very important part of our business is also now online real estate. So we have, media and content, for a diverse sort of portfolio of companies. And, from a cloud perspective, we actually have been all in for almost about 5 years now. So globally across News Corp, I'd say about 65% of our infrastructure is now in the cloud, which is significant.
Absolutely.
And that was a very conscious business decision and technology decision that was made for a number of reasons. Obviously, all the scalability and the price, benefits that the cloud gives, but also flexibility for our employees because of the nature of the different businesses and the different type of employees that we have. They want to move quickly, and this is everything from journalists creating content to our developers. We have a lot of developers and the type of environments that they use. So it's been a core part of our strategy, everything from enterprise apps such as emails and employee file storage to collaboration tools, and then infrastructure as a service. So it's been a very conscious strategy. And but to your point, there will always be probably some things and some workloads that, for various reasons, maybe it's too costly to move them to the cloud, because sometimes it's not just shift and lift, but you have to rewrite or transform those apps before they can move to the cloud. So there probably will be always some things, but we really try to limit it. We almost say, even with new technologies that we deploy, you almost have to get an exception if you're not going to put it in the cloud.
Sure.
That's been our...
Ramki, I presume you would say to Latha that you're astounded that she's allowing 35% of the business not to be migrated to the cloud, and why doesn't she just do that straight away? Would that be your answer to Ramki?
No, I think the problem is a little more fundamental. If you really look at what's happening with customers, and I think John and Balan quite articulated that in terms of business changes that we are seeing. Clearly, the cost structures of managing the supply chain in a traditional sort of linear environment to this integrated multi-platform world. The cost structures, the cycle time, the scalability of tasks. Previously you were busy putting out maybe a domestic one feed out. Today you need to put out that content simultaneously to go to 130, 140 markets. So the concurrency of the tasks that sort of you would do within your company to kind of serve the customer base that you're doing that. So I believe that there is a need to fundamentally relook at your operating model in being able to service your consumers. And then I think if you really look at the incumbent state is one of what I call islands of automation, right? Because these operating structures existed and you started a new group, and that group sort of started to fend for themselves, and you started to sort of create technology pools to sort of, start to create. I think reimagining this is hard, and I think that's what our customers are doing. And so where I do see that, if you really look at your landscape of your enterprise, and you look at that in the lens of the content supply chain, right from the creation processes to the distribution processes to the marketing processes of letting your consumers know that this is coming. If you tie that into some of the commercial and legal sort of processes, all the way to sort of some of the exhibition and delivery processes. If you really look at that in totality, I think there's a need to have an integrative sort of view of things, as opposed to sort of a siloed way of things. Then I think this is where I think we need to reimagine our tech stack. And the way to reimagine our tech stack has many components. Virtualization of just not computing, virtualization of business processes, and leverage of cloud. These are all sort of very essential pillars on the back of which I think this reimagining can happen. But as much as our customers are fighting that hard battle of this transition from traditional business models to sort of competing with some of the new age business models, this reimagining is going to be solved through technology, in my view.
Mm-hmm. But John, we were talking about that, your ability to manage workflows, peak workflows. Don't you have to have a completely different type of business model with cloud vendors? We've talked about metered usage before. Is there a different relationship with the way that this must be priced internally for you to be able to manage this? Because sure, the big CapEx rounds aren't there anymore, are they?
Well, look, it's been widely talked about around efficiency of plants and building to maxes, and those comments that I think are absolutely right. You go out and you buy 10 devices and you measure the efficiency of those, and they're not very good. So it's just the opposite. Now it gives you the opportunity, if you can get ahead of it, to my point previously about intent, what you're intending to do, you can scale the infrastructure in a much more efficient way possible and be flexible. And that means both up and down, which is a key component as we think about the transition from having, hundreds of linear channels through to, much more of or in the sports business, a pop-up mindset, US Open, 10 courts of tennis. That ability to pop up for that, but increasingly get out from that cost is important. In the past, we would go, oh, great, we're going to do 10 courts of US Open. I need, infrastructure to do that might not be utilized, the next day. Or I'd maybe go and source it as a strategy too. That becomes complicated, and handoffs and all of those kinds of things. So I think it's an advantage, the pricing transformation.
To my point earlier about things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, have any of you actually seen true examples of that actually happening now in your workflows, that you would say, yes, I can put my finger on that and say that is machine learning, that is artificial intelligence? Balan?
Yeah, certainly AI is pervasive. Where we are implementing AI mostly in our customer interactions. So we've got really intelligent chatbots now. We've got lots of really behind the scenes. When you look at it, it's actually quite magical, where you have a whole bunch of interaction happening with no human beings involved, and the consumer would probably not be the wiser until maybe it gets really complex. And so you'll see intelligence being brought into many facets of what we do. Our new voice remote has an NLP that's really very machine learning based, and an NLP, sorry, natural language processor, and especially for operations like ours where we have services in so many different languages, you almost need all this help to be able to make something intelligible to your consumers. So you'll see AI pervading almost in every facet of our operations. Probably I'd say 15% now, probably about 50% in 5 years, and even higher after that.
So Latha, it's not a buzzword, it's actually in the industry now.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think it's here and becoming more and more critical for businesses, whether it's internally how you manage the enterprise, or from my role, also how you secure the enterprise, and then definitely from a digital perspective. Some of the areas we've looked at it is definitely in our news businesses in terms of recommendations of what you might be interested in reading. In the digital advertising business, that's a very other concrete use case for AI. And also within the enterprise, as Balan mentioned, we're looking at sort of testing it for more service management capabilities. I mean, how painful is it today to go and open an IT ticket and kind of just go through that whole process, and looking at ways that we can automate it. And as I mentioned on the security side, because security is such a big data problem, you want to have visibility across the enterprise and monitor it and find that needle in a haystack of where there might be a threat. AI and some of the stuff we're doing, which is more supervised machine learning and training the system over time, has been seeing some really interesting results. So I definitely think it's way more than a buzzword, and we're looking at how we can incorporate it widely.
Okay, you mentioned the S word, security, which we presume
I had to get that in there.
So, on that, the background that I've been reading about things like Game of Thrones being the most pirated, breaking all records, over 1 billion illegal views, whether it's streaming or downloading, more people than actually legally watched it. Mm-hmm. It seems, and I know Ramki, there was an incident at Star, but that, and people were arrested even for that. Now, there are the things that we can do with security, but what about the kind of weakest link in all this, which is the human? How can we protect content when there are people offering rewards to put content out illegally? What have you seen? What did you see at Star?
No, I think, look, I think everybody knows that this is an emerging tough problem in our if you will, enterprises and sort of ecosystems that enterprises work with. Clearly, there is, we got to strive to make it harder and harder. I think that's sort of really, I think, where our focus sort of have to be, and which is where I think we should try and sort of get more business processes within the ambit of sort of if you will, electronic control as much as possible. And wherever there is sort of really, really standalone human involvement, we need to try and see ways of securing it. I'll give you an example. Wherever sort of this construct of physical handling of content and so on and so forth, and whenever the content has to sort of leave the environment to kind of go somewhere else, there's probably need for us to sort of multi-factor it from an activity send perspective, right? So there are some new sort of tools that we need to sort of put in place to first try and get more and more of content and activities within the electronic sort of realm of us being able to control it, as opposed to this being able to sort of stand alone. An example, content localization, and again, it's widely sort of referred to say that a good percentage of some of the leaks sort of happen in the content localization workflow. Ability to bring in content localization within the same secure environment, as opposed to you making copies of the content for the purposes of localization, as a case in point. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, right across. And I see that sometimes consumer-facing systems have sort of interestingly gained far more sophistication than the upfront business systems.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of the other sort of construct of needing to kind of relook at some of the way we're handling content upstream, right from the gate to the time it gets delivered to consumer-facing systems. And I think this is constant work. And yeah, we have some interesting learnings coming out of incidents like these. And yeah, we are very aggressively moving forward to kind of introduce newer aspects of those learnings, coming back to either technology changes, process changes, or people activity-related sort of changes. And I think both people, systems, processes, we got to have like a more holistic approach to kind of deal with this issue.
And that's just content, never mind PII and all this stuff. We've got to deal with subscriber data. We're getting into that. I mean, that's when it gets crazy.
Right. Balan, it seems that we're all advocates of putting things in the cloud, but doesn't this break one of the most fundamental rules that we used to have, which is not relying on one or two providers? And I would suggest that many of the services that we're talking about that you're all using possibly uses one of maybe 2 cloud vendors. So what's the redundancy for the cloud? What happens when the cloud breaks? I mean, we had an AWS outage earlier in the year that took people by surprise. As I said, have we put too many eggs in 1 or 2 baskets?
Well, that's really 3 massive providers here, right? The 3 usual suspects. They all do a pretty dang good job, I must say. You'll have engineering teams that will want to build their own cloud for a variety of reasons, right? Instead of going public, some stuff for hybrid, a lot of private, for all the reasons that you'd imagine. You know, the 3 big reasons are: 1, you can control your own destiny and your own data. 2, you have, you know, the optimization of latency because you want to be as close to the customer as possible with all these services. And 3, which is, sometimes we don't speak about it much, but the whole issue around CapEx versus OpEx, meaning if you build it yourself, you can capitalize all the infrastructure costs. If you go out to AWS, Google, or Microsoft, this is all expense. And depending on how your business model is structured, you know, the valuation of your business usually is a function of a multiple of something called an operating cash flow, which is above capital. So you want to optimize not spending as much OpEx as possible. So you take all these things into account, and you can argue you should build your own cloud. But it's really, no matter what you do and no matter how good you are, you're never going to be as good as one of those 3 guys. And I'll tell you, yeah, AWS has had outages, but if you look at any of our networks, we've had more outages. Any given week.
So it's all relative.
It's all, yeah. And they've already built an amazing operational structure. They have internal redundancies. You can have multiple ins and out from connectivity. You get all the operational metrics you'd ever want, and you don't have to build a huge operational team yourself, right? So as a CTO, I would say, you know, and to any of my colleagues, I would say, you know, resist having your teams convince you to build your own cloud, because, you know, remember the cost structure. The businesses are getting disrupted. If you do everything yourself, you're getting stuck with a pretty big size cost.
John, do you believe that the cloud's effectively self-redundant?
Well, I think you have to be considerate in how you architect the utilization of it to help it. You know, prioritization of applications, distribution of applications, multiple data centers. I mean, you know, we're still, I think, at least for us, in a, you know, single provider strategy. Obviously, everybody wants to be a multi-cloud, multi-provider view for inherent, you know, redundancy across that. But it'll come. Right. But you have to pay attention. I mean, you just can go out and take well, here's your proposal, you know, from whoever you've chosen as your provider. You have to look at that. I mean, this is not a magic bullet, here you go. You know, to Balan's point about close to the customer, close to utilization, spreading assets, spreading applications to protect it. You know, you have to think about it. It's not an automatic.
Okay. Latha, what other areas are you looking at on your roadmap at the moment?
So mobile, of course, is huge for us because, again, traditionally some of the news publishing businesses were in print, are still in print, and making that transition to web and mobile web and mobile app. So that's a huge part of our strategy, is how do we get into more of that DevOps and securing that DevOps process to be quickly launching and maintaining, you know, our mobile apps. And then also VR, AR in a couple of businesses, especially our real estate business, which is a great use case. Again, how many times have we looked at a listing online and you see photos and then you go visit the place and it never looks like the photos. And so definitely with, you know, VR, there's opportunity there to better improve that whole customer experience. And also looking at like image recognition in real estate, where maybe you could take a picture of the house and then you automatically will tell you information about it. And then also in our sports broadcasting, we've been doing 360 video for a while now, but looking at, again, moving more into the AR space of, you know, how do you engage with the user as well as, you know, sort of broadcast sports.
Let's pick on 2 of those, VR, AR first. Balan, and I don't know if those of you who were at Brian Sullivan, president of Fox Consumer Group this morning, he was very honest, and he said when asked about VR that he still felt burnt about what happened with 3D. I'm too pretty burnt as well, and I think quite a lot of us in the room were part of that journey. So what lessons, if any, can we learn about the potential hype of VR or AR when we look back at what a lot of us believed was going to happen with 3D? What's your view?
You know, there was a lot of friction with 3D. Just the equipment, goggles, headaches, whatever. You know,
Sounds like VR to me.
Yeah. So VR, I tell you, you lump VR and AR together. I'd say separate it. AR before VR. You know, it's a lot more user-friendly. Remember this demographic shift. Kids completely get it. I mean, Snapchat is really all about AR. You know, if any of you watched the Apple launch this week, it's amazing what they're going to be doing with messaging and with their facial recognition that you pointed out. So AR will be mainstream. VR, still pretty high friction. Expensive equipment, you know, a very individualistic experience, a lot of content that needs to be created for it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, John, the Olympics, are we going to see AR maybe?
You will definitely see us. I'm not going to tell you exactly what we're going to do. You'll have to watch. Right. But you will definitely see us, you know, with augmented in graphics. You know, you'll see us working with OBS on VR. But yeah, we think that, you know, where the consumer wants to be is where we have to get the content. Those are components of it. I think AR is an incredibly helpful production tool, especially in explaining sports and explaining what is occurring maybe at a given moment and allowing, you know, either talent on screen to interact with it or you as a consumer to do that directly. Certainly you can do that. You know, I think we've done some incredible VR content at not only at Eurosport but at Discovery. We did on the sports side a few runs with Bodie Miller, the champion skier, in VR. Right. It was an interesting experience. I mean, personally, you know, I watched it and was like, that's interesting, but it was very disorienting in terms of, you know, how it presented to me, just because of the separation between speed and elevation and height. But it was an interesting way to experience what they are. I think producers are still working to, you know, create a content production model that utilizes the technology in the best way. And that is an evolution. We do that in every format that we've ever had in the media business. And that will continue to evolve, and the technology will have to continue to move with it. It's an evolution. This is not, you know, one thing, oh, that's all dead. I mean, it's fun at conferences like this when people like to proclaim, you know, winners and losers. There's obviously winners and losers. But so much of what we're talking about up here is evolution from where we are today until tomorrow.
You mentioned mobile as well. For those of us who've been here for the last couple of days, I remember it was explained to us that in one news organization, they've completely flipped the priority of who they are producing news for and what format they are. And where mobile was at the end of the list, it's now at the top of the list. Is that the sort of thing you were hinting at, Latha, when you talk about what's going on at News Corp with
yeah, no,
mobile?
absolutely. And again, you know, with the Wall Street Journal, there are many folks who like the print edition. So it's not that that's any less important, but definitely there's definitely a different type of buyer that prefers to get, you know, the news on the web. So there's been substantial changes made there. And yeah, that's definitely a key part of it.
It's also multiple platform consumption, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what people want, flexibility to get it either in paper form or in digital form.
Yeah, that's right.
And Balan 5G then, obviously, you know, is mentioned in this conversation. Is 5G just another incremental move from 3 and 4G? What's 5G going to give us or give Liberty Global that we didn't have before?
Well, 5G is, there's a few things with 5G. One, the technology is truly a step function change from a couple of standpoints. One, the spectral efficiency. So what you can do in 5G over 4G is a lot more efficient. You can push more bits through on 5G than 4G, so that's one. And there's a bunch of other technology benefits there as well with network slicing, all that. But it is optimized for lots of bandwidth efficiently, and it's optimized for IoT. And thirdly, because of where 5G is going to sit in the spectrum range, which is going to be in the 30 gigahertz, 60 gigahertz, you have huge swath of bandwidth available. So now you're talking about 5G coming out at about a 1 gigabit type speeds. And so why is that relevant? One, the speeds is big. But two, when you operate in this high bandwidth, so the higher range it goes, you know, the higher the frequency, the shorter your wavelength is. When your wavelength is very small, those little mobile devices, you know, you can pack in a lot more antennas on it. So your ability to transmit and receive is so much better. And likewise, you would say with all these IoT devices on automobiles and light bulbs and everything else. So 5G is a game changer. Now, where its challenge is, because it operates in the high spectrum, you can't use big macro cells for this. You have to go back to small cells. So if you, let's say you're Verizon, you got like 60,000 towers. To do small cells, you got to build another couple 100,000 towers. That is capital intensive, and it's operational expense intensive as well, because not only do you have to build all these towers, you have to feed them, you know, backhaul, and you got to write a check every month to each one of these hundreds of thousands of towers. That is the challenge for 5G. So 5G holds a lot of promise, but there's a lot of cost involved in it. And at this point, if you look at today's economics of broadband, mobile broadband, especially going to unlimited, today's economics could not, will not be able to justify. So if you're a business case guy, or you actually intend on making some money here, it is going to be pretty hard. But for sure, 5G, Tokyo Olympics 2020, it'll be out. Handsets will be out soon after that. A lot more handsets. So 2021, 2022, it'll be more normal than not.
Yeah, one of the interesting things some of us were discussing is 4G was so instrumental in terms of mobile streaming and mobile advertising, like that was such a big step forward. But downloading is still sort of hard. If you're catching a flight and you want to download a movie, it's likely not going to happen quickly. But with 5G, once it is more pervasive, you know, whether we actually start to almost see a shift, you know, from streaming back to downloads, if it can happen in seconds, right? So. Yeah.
But does 5G replace the fixed network eventually?
Oh, absolutely not.
No?
No. It's going to be very hard because the economics, you know, the economics of doing it. Now, if somebody absolutely does not intend to make any money at it, you can build out hundreds and hundreds of thousands of towers, buy all that spectrum, you know, and the way it would work, because you're in the high frequencies, you'd have to put on a device outside your home on your window or something and then wire it back in. It's a lot of install. And any given day of the week, month, year, frequencies running over a fixed, shielded, you know, medium would be a lot more efficient than going over free space. So the economics would benefit fixed. Now the question is, you know, the business model. Yeah.
John, mobile's going to be big for the Olympics and Discovery generally?
Sure. Again, we'll put our content wherever people want to consume it. And I think to Balan's point, though, for 5G specifically, I think we're much more focused on 2020.
Ramki, we were just, while we're talking about this, you've actually been involved with other industries outside of media. How, when you look at, you know, the types of transformational work and workflows that everyone's been talking about here, how do we compare to some other industries that you've seen? I always possibly get a sense that we're lagging in our industry, but maybe that's just because I want things to move a lot quicker than they possibly can. But if you take completely different industries that must have gone through these sorts of transformations that we've been talking about, how do you think we fare?
No, I think John alluded to this earlier on about there's a lot to learn from the manufacturing industry. You know, if you just go back 20, 25 years, maybe 20 years, you know, the world made this transition from paper to paperless, right? And if you really look at computing, networking, applications, outsourcing, all of those industries grew on the back of that paper to paperless migration that enterprises went through, you know, and obviously the digitization of the enterprise really happened slowly but steadily over the last 20 years. And that eureka moment really happened when this industry went from tape to tapeless. And I go back to the other industries. If you really look at the first wave of that digitization within the enterprise, you really had, SAP for manufacturing resource planning. You had PeopleSoft for HR. You had Siebel for CRM. You had Oracle for financials. So if you really look at it, each of these enterprise software is specialized. I call it silos, right? And as time went by, you really had this evolution from sort of departmental technology solutions to enterprise-wide solutions. I'm just going for the other sectors and how the other sectors have really sort of, and all of those transitions have had a reason, right? The fact that then the internet came along, and a lot of things happened with the consumers and markets in each of these segments. So much so that today we define that every business is a technology business, right? I mean, that's the extent of digitization that you've seen in some of the other sectors. I think the M&E sector has a lot to learn in similar fashions, because today, if you look at production departments having their own gigs to do, each and everybody is sort of trying to kind of operate in their own tech stack, and even within the same if you will, media networks or broadcast businesses, US operates one way, and Europe and offices operate different ways. Asia operates a third way, and each one of them have just replicated tech stacks, right? And guess what? All of this worked in the physical world because media was with you, and you're doing everything with you in and around where the physical media was present. And obviously, when we moved to file, just continued. Just that you replace the equipments to kind of deal with the file as opposed to a tape. But this is where I think this reimagining comes in. Think of what will happen on the digital side, right? You had to broadcast from those territories, and you had this concentration of activities and workflows moving to those territories because you had to beam a signal or whatever, and then you had sort of certain regulation associated with linear. Come to non-linear, there is literally no legislation. There's no regulation of that. And you can put a signal up in the air. Amazon sort of uploads the content, and instantly, wherever they are present across the world, instantly consumers get access to the content. Now you're talking about strategies that are more centralized. No more supply chains for manufacturing plants are done. Oh, I'm manufacturing in India, so I will have something in India. I'm manufacturing in Japan, and I'll have something in India. Supply chains are all sort of centralized as well, and you find the suppliers getting closer for economic reasons. But the planning and sort of management of the suppliers are all central. So this movement from sort of being sort of, if you will, completely decentralized right at the far end to kind of, slowly sort of centralizing sort of, and that's kind of the business transformation other sectors went through. M&E sectors, in my opinion, will go through that. And I think, there is some catch-up to do, but our catch-up is not because we chose not to act on it. In our world, what we manufacture was physical. Was at least sort of, packaged in physical formats. And when that sort of gave rise to sort of being a file, I think the transition sort of, is then going to be lagging that eureka moment of paper becoming paperless and tape becoming tapeless.
The way we say it is that, the cloud makes geography irrelevant.
Right.
Suddenly now you're able to move assets in a hyper-efficient way, have them worked on, exploited in different ways, egressed in different ways by just, traversing, so to speak. So it really changes. I mean, theoretically, you could do that, with servers, but the long-haul connectivity, WAN expenses, once you're traversing someone's, multi-site strategy, it really changes the concept of workflow and what you can do and how you can use resources.
Yeah. Balan, doesn't this sound a little bit like Big Brother, central HQ, putting something up to the cloud, and all the regions just have to follow suit, and you've basically killed all your regional creativity?
Wow. No, I think when you look at scale matters, and you have to be very careful what you scale and what you don't, right? What's the difference between, some of these West Coast companies, the F company, G company, all these guys, right? That F didn't sound good. But anyways, these guys have tremendous amount of scale because they build things once. They do it one way, one infrastructure, one platform. The benefit of that is you can innovate a lot faster. You're innovating on one platform, not on 17 different platforms. You know, when Netflix launches in Belgium, and the local guy says, you know what, that UI may work in the United States, but really not here. And you know that $7.99 in Belgium, it's going to be $10.99. It won't work here. You need this content. And before you know it, the guy's like, you need to go work somewhere else because there is one platform. There is no custom Belgium UI, right? So or else you get disaggregated really fast. Same thing with all of us as well in our world. We've got to be careful where you don't create the same platform multiple times. You want one common platform, everybody uses it, one common UI, and then you can localize content and localize a few things because your competitors are different in different regions. But you do not want to fragment yourself from a technology standpoint, or else what's the point of having everything in the cloud, et cetera? You will slow down on three things. You will slow down on your cost efficiencies, you will definitely slow down on your innovation, and you will definitely slow down on your ability to keep up with your product.
Totally right.
You know, so my advice would be, if you're building platforms in technology, do it once and, you know, and scale that.
But then, you know, it just might happen to be the fact that the UI guy that you employed in Belgium is probably your best UI guy, and you're coming down pretty dictatorial on them.
Well, if the Belgian UI guy is the best, then theoretically that best UI should work for California as well.
Okay.
So it's not that you can't, but you don't want to have a Belgian UI and a California UI, right? So that's where, you know, with innovation and a common platform, the smartest ideas wins. You know, you vote with your code, right? You know, if you are really good, everybody's going to adapt it. I was at, you know, one of these companies recently, and their best ideas on that social platform, one of their best ideas came from their engineering team in Thailand. But they're innovating on that same platform that the guys in California and everybody else are innovating on. Mm-hmm. And he got in, and everybody in the world is using that feature developed in Thailand, but off the same platform. There's no Thai version of Facebook, right? You know, so it's kind of, that's how we ought to run. So as leaders, we ought to be able to pick from the best ideas, but onto that same platform. And don't let it get disaggregated. Just because you have a better idea, let's go build a different thing for you. You lose. You end up losing to the Netflixes, the Googles, the Facebook, the Microsofts, the Snapchats, everybody else.
So John, you don't think the way you've set things up could possibly kind of degrade some of the regional creativity that you've had in the past?
No, that is the entire goal is to, you know, put efficiency into, you know, these kinds of processes to free up the creative people to do it. Right? You know, David Zaslav, our CEO, talks all the time about left side, right side. On the left side is anybody who makes content, generates revenue. On the right side is everybody else. Right? How do you keep those things in a place where you're really efficient on the right side of that? Well, you know, building bridges to the revenue and the content to help them go faster. Mm-hmm. But when, you know, every time you enter country X and it's like, okay, how do you do it here? Oh, that's different. Or I got to do another interface. Or I got to, you know, write some custom code to make this thing that, you know, they want to use in that market or has been historically used in that market. That's where it just becomes like spaghetti.
Right.
Of just complexity and you know, never mind security. I mean, then you start to layer that and it's like, oh, what's the security capability of that platform versus this platform, and what are they required to do, you know, from a regulatory perspective? And this, you're not going to change that, but you know, once you say, okay, these varying regulatory environments, and then here's a whole system landscape that's 17 systems long, you can spin a huge amount of human cycles. Okay. In architects, in business analysts, in innovation teams, and like suddenly you look around and you're like, look at what I'm spending to just think about the problem. Never mind fix it.
Yeah. Latha, if I was a union guy, every time I hear the word, or Balan say the word efficiency, sounds like someone's losing their job. Is that the case?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think so many companies struggle with this, which is how much do you leave within the brands and then how much do you centralize? And I think it's finding the balance. So in our case, We have a number of brands that are well known in different parts of the world. But there might be some consistent back-end functions that you can centralize, say identity. Does everyone need to figure out how to do identity? Probably not. We could, centralize that. So we really look at it from, what's customer-facing versus maybe some of the back-end stuff that you could start to bring together. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Latha is absolutely right. The brands, like probably there's probably no News Corp brand to a consumer, right? The News Corp is a company, but they buy Wall Street Journal, they buy stuff.
Right.
Liberty Global, there isn't a single consumer outside of people in the industry that knows Liberty Global. There's no brand. There's Virgin Media, there's Cablecom, there's Telenet. But the platform, identity is a good one where we all used to have different identity platforms. Google has one identity platform. Netflix has one identity platform. Facebook has one identity platform. Identity is truly a service. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to fragment yourself too much because you will get disaggregated by more innovative West Coast, huge scale platform players.
And I'll actually tie that back to your earlier question about AI. To do some of these insights that we hope to do, we need to start, bringing some of this tech together, right? If you just have a lot of disparate data sets and none of these systems talk to each other, to actually get to the point where you're understanding your customers and able to recommend, the right services or content for them will become really challenging.
And not spending forever trying to harmonize it before you actually can use it.
Yeah.
That's such a waste.
Well, we've come to the point where we've got some time for some questions. We've got 2 roving mics on the floor, so please put your hand up if you've got any questions. While you're thinking of these excellent questions and putting your hand up really clear so people can see, because I can't really see you with the lights. So there's
one back there. One over there.
Okay. Balan, just while we're getting prepared for that, just a quick one for me on your set-top box roadmap. I believe you're launching set-top boxes that are capable of cloud recording and some that have got a hard drive. I mean, the obvious question, it comes up every year, why can't you do it all in the cloud, and why have you got a set-top box at all?
Well, first, cloud recording, that we've already launched that in multiple countries where we, in any of our service, if you have our service, something called Horizon, you can look at any content, look at your UI going forward, but you can also go on that same UI, go backwards. And you can pick any content up to, in our case, depending which countries, 10 days to 30 days, where you can just click on something and just play it, so you don't have to record it, because we record everything in the cloud. But what we don't do today, and we will be launching here in February, is where you can initiate the recording yourself. This we are recording everything, you can just move backwards. So what's the difference? If you initiate the recording yourself, you can keep it for years if you want to. But if our recording is 30 days, because now, why haven't we done it yet? Obviously, it's not the technology, because we've already done it, but we are negotiating rights. There's a lot of content rights negotiation that needs to happen. And there's one country in all of our operations where I don't think we'll ever cross that line of being able to do it, because we have some holdouts that just feel very strongly that their business model will be disrupted by this. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer. Everybody has to protect their own interests. I get that. But if you're not careful, to protect your own interests, you may make your product less and less competitive.
Okay.
The beauty of having everything in the cloud is you record it. Today, our over-the-top service, you can watch anything, pause it, pick it up at the same point on your set-top box. All that happens because our ability to have rights to put things in the cloud. Okay. If you don't, give us those rights, it's going to be hard for your services as well.
Sure. Let's take some questions. There's a lady over there.
Hi, Janet Gardner from Perspective Media. You spoke about the importance of identity as a service. Can you each speak to, have you implemented identity as a service at the enterprise level within your organization today, or do you plan to do so?
So each of you just quickly on that one. Balan?
Well, identity service within the enterprise, it's a lot easier. Almost everybody has that already, right? Because you have a whole bunch of applications internally that you use that identity as your proxy for what you're entitled to do in the company, right? Starting with email to all the way to, do you have access to billing systems? Identity is already a service in most enterprises. Identity as a service outside is something that we've always been very shy of. I mean, as an industry, we would say a federated ID would mean bring your Facebook ID to mine, and we would authenticate that, and we would enable that. That was step one. That was a big step for a lot of folks. Before, just 5 years ago, you have to have your own ID in our business for you to be able to use our service. But now we federate it. But really, identity as a service for all of us would be, eventually, you have my ID, and you can use it to get logged on to Facebook or to Google, right? Federate our services to someone else. And this is something that, the pay TV or the media industry has not been as good as some of the West Coast companies. We have millions of subscribers. I have 27 million subscribers. That is a lot of subscribers, 27 million IDs plus 3 IDs in a household because your kids, it's a household-based service. That's like 40, 50 million IDs theoretically I should have that a Facebook or Google or somebody else would be very interested in having me federate to them. But I have to create a service first and entice people to use us as the ID as opposed to bring your Facebook ID to us.
I think, sorry? On the media side?
In terms of what people should have access to, or what do you mean, Janet?
Identity where you're tagging, identity to an asset, all the way down to content, to person, to identity for everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we've been all working on various schemas and metadata models for the last however many years. Are we great at it? No. Are we great at integration of sports data into, highlight creation? Let's say, we're getting better. We're not great at it, but we are now using more data from other sources to attach to the media than we probably ever have. The big issue to me in all of this, is frankly governance. I mean, it's really, really hard to get accurate, when you reach way upstream into business systems and sources, to keep that data accurate and governed as it comes downstream. Who's accountable for this stuff?
Another question at the back there?
Hi there. I'm Matt Turner from... Oh, I'm sorry. Did I go ahead?
No, you're okay.
Matt Turner, I'm a CTO from MarkLogic, a database company. You talked about data just at the end. And John, you just talked a little bit about some of the costs. So I wanted to ask the panel, what are you investing in data? How much are you investing in data? But more particularly, what part of the process? What's going to be where are you investing and what outcomes are you looking from data?
Latha, do you want to take that one?
Sure. In terms of, because of the different brands, looking at the data that we have about a customer in each of the brands and how we can use that to better make recommendations on, whether it's, again, news or can we link news to real estate and sort of vice versa. So it's definitely, a huge part of the strategy is better understanding the customer and, how we can provide better content for them.
Okay.
If I may just add,
Sorry, go on.
I think there is a need for us to associate data with content. Historically, we held data separately. The more and more decisions are going to be, whether it is access, associated with it or downstream requirements of sort of data going along with the content. I think it's important to kind of, centralize that sort of data and association with content. And today we see that very disparate, sort of multiple systems having the data, and we don't know which is the moment of truth. And we're spending lots and lots of sort of time cycles to kind of, validate each one when a business use case comes to leverage the data. I think there is that need to kind of put it together.
To the centralization point, data is like the first thing you should do. Yeah. If you lose control of that, that's chaos, right? You don't know what's right. So having that be your home base, so to speak, is hugely important.
Okay. We have another question at the back there?
Sean Kelly from Chorus Entertainment, and it's fairly straightforward to outsource a service like transcode to the cloud. It gets a little bit more complicated when you're trying to replace your back office systems, and I'm just wondering, what has the panel done, particularly Balan in the past, to deal with some of those back office systems and get them into the cloud?
Balan?
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? Because you have back office systems that were created over the years. You have back office systems that you inherited because you do M&A transactions, you buy companies and all. So you've got this mishmash. And all these back office systems embedded in it is all sorts of different processes as well. And, if anything, one of my biggest challenges, at what point do you say, burn it and move on, right? And it's very disruptive. in the hierarchy of needs for a CTO, this is not at the top, right? Because one, it's hard, it's disruptive, it's not, it doesn't bring any new revenue. Change BSS, there's no new revenue associated with that. So you end up always like my kids, right? Always deferring the hard stuff to later, and so in our world at least, we've been slowly progressing in this path, and but by no means we have any big bang project to replace our back office.
Okay, well, I'm afraid the clock of doom that faces us that you can't see has just hit the zeros. I just hope you had an insight into that. Obviously, we could have had another half an hour there, which we'll do next year maybe. I'm mindful of the fact that it's our 50th anniversary here at IBC. So my parting words to you is, if you've heard this conversation, do a little test for me. Walk around the floor and look at all the booths that are possibly selling boxes that connect into other boxes that connect into other boxes, and question yourself, how long will that go on before those people possibly should be actually giving virtualized services in the cloud? And how will that IBC floor change more to be more software driven than maybe what we're seeing at the moment? But as I said, I hope you enjoyed the session today, and let's end by thanking our panel.